The week I found out I owned 51% of my husband's company was the same week I found out he'd been trying to sell it behind my back. I know how that sounds. Trust me, I lived it, and it still doesn't feel real when I say it out loud. My name is Leanne. I'm 38 years old, and for the past 11 years, I have been the person who made Callaway Freight Solutions actually function. I handled the carrier contracts. I managed the compliance filings. When our insurance auditor came in every spring, I was the one who sat across from him for 6 hours and answered every question without looking at a single note. My husband, Russell, would walk through at some point, shake the man's hand, say something like, "She keeps us honest," and disappear back into whatever he was doing. I used to think that was a compliment. Russell was the face of the company. That was how we divided it. He had the handshake, the golf membership, the easy laugh that made clients feel like they were his oldest friends. I had the spreadsheets, the deadlines, the vendor relationships, and the quiet satisfaction of knowing that none of it would run without me. We built it together, starting in the second bedroom of our first apartment in Columbus, Ohio, with a laptop, 2 folding chairs, and a shared cell phone number we forwarded depending on who was free. That was before Ivy. I should back up. My father's name was Robert Chen. He came to the United States from Taiwan in 1979 with 2 suitcases and a degree in civil engineering that American firms spent 3 years refusing to recognize. He eventually built a small but respected structural consulting firm in Cincinnati. He was methodical, careful, and deeply private about money. When he passed away in March, a heart attack, sudden, no warning, I flew home alone because Russell said he had a client meeting he couldn't reschedule. My mother had passed 6 years earlier, so I sat in my parents' house by myself for 4 days, went through my father's papers, handled the funeral arrangements, and flew back to Columbus, still wearing the same black dress I'd packed in a hurry. When I got home, Russell was in the kitchen eating takeout. He looked up and said, "You look exhausted. You should probably take a few days." I said I was fine. He went back to his phone. I didn't cry in front of him. I'm not sure why. Maybe I'd already started to feel something I didn't have a name for yet. A low, steady pull away from him. Like a tide. Going out so slowly you don't notice until the water is already gone. 3 weeks after the funeral, I got a call from a woman named Constance Wheeler. She was my father's attorney, based in Cincinnati, and she asked me to come in at my earliest convenience to go over the estate. I assumed it would be straightforward. My father had the house, a retirement account, some savings. I told Russell I was heading down for the day, and he nodded without looking up. Constance met me at her office on 5th Street, a small suite with dark wood furniture and diplomas going back to 1987. She was maybe 60, with reading glasses pushed up on her head, and a directness I found immediately comforting. She shook my hand, poured me coffee I didn't ask for, and sat across from me with a manila folder. "Your father was more organized than most of my clients," she said. "Everything is in order." Then she opened the folder. My father had established a trust in 2019. Inside it, the house, his retirement account, a brokerage portfolio I hadn't known existed, and a life insurance policy. The total value of the estate, she told me, came to just under $2.3 million. I set down my coffee. "He named you as sole beneficiary," Constance said. "There are no other claimants. It transfers cleanly." I sat with that for a moment. 2.3 million. My father, who had clipped grocery coupons until the week he died. My father, who drove a 12-year-old Camry and wore the same winter coat for 9 years. My father, who had handed me $20 every time I left after a visit like I was still in college. I didn't know what to say, so I just asked, "What do I need to do?" Constance walked me through the paperwork. Signature here, initial there, transfer documents for the brokerage account. She pulled up a form on her computer to verify my legal status for the transfer. "Standard procedure," she said, "just to confirm the beneficiary's current information." She typed something, looked at the screen, and then she looked at me. "Mrs. Callaway," she said carefully, "I need to ask you something, and I want you to take a breath before you answer." The way she said it made my stomach drop. "According to the Ohio court records," she said, "your marriage to Russell Callaway was dissolved. The finalization date on file is January 14th. I heard the words, I understood each one individually, but my brain refused to put them in order. I started. "January 14th of this year," she said. 14 weeks ago. I sat there. I didn't speak for what felt like a very long time. I was doing the math without meaning to. January 14th. Russell had been home on January 14th. I remembered because we'd ordered pizza and watched a documentary about shipping containers. Which, yes, I am aware is how we spent our evenings, and he'd fallen asleep on the couch before it was over. That's not possible, I finally said. I didn't file for divorce. I know, Constance said, but someone did, and the record shows both parties' signatures on the dissolution agreement. I didn't sign anything. She nodded slowly, like she'd been expecting me to say that. I think, she said, you need to call an attorney, today, before you do anything else. And I would strongly suggest you do not mention this inheritance to anyone until you've spoken with legal counsel. I looked at her. Not to anyone, she said again. I drove back to Columbus in something close to an out-of-body state. I kept both hands on the wheel and the radio off, and I replayed the last 4 months in my head like I was looking for something I'd left behind in a room. Had I signed anything? Had Russell put papers in front of me? Lease renewals, insurance forms, the 1,000 small documents that pass through our life. Had something been slipped in? Had I been so exhausted after my father's death that I'd initialed something without reading it? I didn't know. And that scared me more than anything. I did not go home first. I called my college roommate Deborah, who became a family law attorney in Dublin, Ohio, and I asked if I could meet her immediately. She said yes without asking why, which is exactly the kind of person Deborah is. I drove straight to her office and sat across from her and said, "Someone filed for divorce in my name and I had no idea." Deborah did not react with the shock I expected. She asked me several very focused questions. She pulled up the public case record on her laptop and went quiet for a few minutes. Then she said, "Leanne, I need to tell you something and I need you to really hear it." I said, "Okay. This is a very serious situation, and the way you handle the next few weeks is going to matter enormously. So here's what I need from you." She looked at me directly. Do not confront Russell. Do not let on that you know. Do not change anything about your routine. Don't move money. Don't consult other people. Don't make any sudden decisions. You come to me and I do the work. Are we clear? I said yes. I meant it. I need to be honest here, though. Meaning it and doing it are two different things. I went home that night and made dinner and ate across the table from Russell, while he talked about a potential contract with a distribution center in Dayton, and I nodded and said, "That sounds promising," and refilled my water glass and thought about how my husband had dissolved our marriage and was still sleeping in our bed. The food tasted like nothing. I went through the motions for 9 days. 9 days of normal mornings and normal conversations, and watching him text on his phone with his screen slightly angled away. I noticed things I'd apparently stopped noticing. How he kept his car keys in his jacket pocket instead of the bowl by the door. How he'd started taking calls in the garage. How he'd bought a new cologne I didn't recognize. On the 6th day, I found the reason. I wasn't snooping. Or, I was, a little. Deborah had asked me to document anything that seemed relevant. I was in the home office looking for the folder with our business registration documents, which I had a legitimate reason to want, and I found instead a printed email in the back of Russell's desk drawer. It was from a real estate firm. A commercial real estate firm. It was addressed to Russell and to someone named Ivy Langford, and it referenced the pending sale of Callaway Freight Solutions and the anticipated closing timeline of Q3. He was selling the company. He was selling our company, the one I had built with him, and he was doing it with someone named Ivy Langford. I put the email back exactly where I found it. I went to the kitchen and poured a glass of water and stood at the sink looking at the backyard for a long time. Then I called Deborah. She was quiet while I told her. Then she said, "Okay, now I need to know something, and this is going to require some digging on your end. Do you know the ownership structure of the company? What percentage is in your name?" I said I'd have to look. I looked. And that was when I found the second thing. When we incorporated in 2014, my father had insisted on one condition for his early contribution. A small loan of $30,000 that had helped us get our first trucks. His condition was that I hold majority ownership. He didn't make a big production of it. He just said, "You're the one doing the actual work, Leanne. Make sure that's documented." We set it up as 51% in my name, 49% in Russell's. I had not thought about that in years. Russell had apparently also not thought about it. Or he'd thought about it and assumed he could work around it, which told me something about what he thought of me. Deborah's voice changed when I told her the ownership split. She said, "He cannot legally sell this company without your signature and your consent. Any purchase agreement he's signed is void." And if he misrepresented ownership status to the buyers, that is fraud. I wrote that word down. Fraud. Over the next 2 weeks, Deborah built a case. She brought in a forensic document specialist who confirmed that my signature on the dissolution agreement was forged, traced from a genuine signature on a business document, modified, and applied. She identified the notary who had processed it and discovered that the notary's license had been flagged for irregularities on 2 previous occasions. She contacted the Ohio Supreme Court's Office of Disciplinary Counsel, and she filed an emergency motion to invalidate the dissolution of marriage on the grounds of fraud and forgery. I still hadn't said a word to Russell. This was the hardest part, not because I wanted to scream at him, though I did, but because I started to understand, very slowly, how many things I'd accepted without question. How many times I'd assumed the best and moved on. How many nights I'd told myself his distance was stress. His coldness was exhaustion. His absence was the price of building something together. I had loved him. I want to say that clearly because it matters. I had genuinely loved him. And loving someone while understanding what they've done to you is its own kind of grief. I cried once, in my car, in the parking lot of a Kroger on a Tuesday afternoon. I gave myself exactly 12 minutes. Then I drove home and made pasta, and talked about the Dayton contract and went to bed. On the 22nd day after Constance Wheeler told me I was apparently single, I came home to find Ivy Langford sitting in my living room. I didn't know who she was at first. She was in her early 30s, dark hair, the kind of easy confidence that comes from never really having been told no. She was perched on the edge of my couch. My couch, where my mother's throw blanket was still folded over the arm, with a glass of wine that Russell had apparently poured for her from the bottle we'd opened at Christmas. Russell was standing by the fireplace. When I walked in, he had the expression of someone who had rehearsed a conversation and was now discovering that rehearsal doesn't help. "Leanne," he said. "I was going to call you." "I'm here now," I said. He introduced her as a business associate. Ivy smiled at me with the precision of someone who has smiled at wives before. "Nice to meet you," she said. I said. I put my bag down on the kitchen counter. I went to the cabinet and got a glass. I poured myself wine from the Christmas bottle, might as well, and I sat down in the armchair across from them. "So," I said, "what are we talking about?" Russell cleared his throat. He said that he and Ivy had been exploring some strategic options for the company, that he'd been meaning to bring it up with me, that there were some structural considerations that needed to be addressed. I watched him talk. I noticed that he did not look at me directly for more than about 2 seconds at a stretch. I thought about Deborah. I thought about her voice saying, "Do not confront him, do not let on, do not make any sudden decisions." I said, "That sounds like something we should probably loop our attorney into." Russell blinked. "We can handle it internally." "I'd really like our attorney involved," I said pleasantly. "It's a significant decision. I just want to make sure everything is done correctly." Ivy's smile didn't change, but something shifted behind it. They left about 40 minutes later. Russell said he'd be back later. I said, "Okay, sure." When the door closed, I sat in my armchair for a moment, finished my wine, and texted Deborah. They showed up. I held it together. "What's our timeline?" She texted back in 4 minutes. "Filing goes in Thursday. Be ready." Thursday came. Deborah filed the motion to invalidate the dissolution, with the forensic evidence attached. At the same time, she sent a formal cease and desist to the real estate firm on behalf of the majority shareholder of Callaway Freight Solutions, me notifying them that no sale could proceed without my authorization, and that any agreement signed by Russell Callaway, misrepresenting himself as having authority to sell, was legally void. She also forwarded the documentation to the Ohio Attorney General's office. Russell found out through his own attorney on Friday morning. I was at Deborah's office when she got the call. She listened for a moment, said a few short things, and hung up. "He's asking what you want," she said. "I'd thought about this. I'd thought about it during those 9 days of silent dinners and 12 minutes in a Kroger parking lot and driving with the radio off. What did I want?" "I want the company," I said. "His 49% transferred to me. I want documentation of every dollar moved out of business accounts in the last 2 years. And I want him to understand that if he makes this complicated, the Attorney General's office is going to have everything they need." Deborah nodded. "And the marriage?" "It's already dissolved," I said. "Apparently." She almost smiled. "It took 6 weeks to finalize. Russell's attorney negotiated, tried to at least. They pushed back on the stock transfer. They suggested a buyout instead. They floated the idea of mutual non-disclosure. Deborah was cordial and patient and completely immovable. In the end, Russell signed over his 49%. The forensic investigation found that he had transferred just under $200,000 out of company accounts in the preceding 18 months, funneled through a consulting LLC that had Ivy Langford's home address as its registered agent. He was required to repay every dollar. The notary who processed the fraudulent dissolution lost her license. The real estate deal collapsed. The buyers, once informed of the ownership situation and the pending investigation, withdrew immediately. On a Wednesday in late June, I sat in a conference room in downtown Columbus with Deborah and a transfer agent, and I signed the final paperwork. When it was done, I owned 100% of Callaway Freight Solutions, the company I had built, the company I had fed with 11 years of early mornings and late nights and phone calls. I took in parking lots and contracts I negotiated while Russell was out playing golf with people whose names I'd had to remind him of. The transfer agent asked if I wanted to change the name of the company. I thought about it. Not yet, I said. I drove home through downtown Columbus on a clear evening in late June, windows down, radio actually on for once. I passed the coffee shop where Russell and I used to go on Saturday mornings. I passed the office building where we'd signed our first major carrier contract, standing in the parking lot afterward, because neither of us could quite believe it had worked. I passed the Kroger parking lot. I didn't stop. My father had built something from nothing, in a country that made him prove himself over and over again, and he had quietly set aside everything he earned, and he had left it to me. He had never once told me that he believed in me more than anyone else did. He just made sure I had 51%. That's how my father said things. The inheritance cleared probate the following month. $2.3 million transferred into an account in my name only. I called Constance Wheeler to confirm receipt, and she said, "Good. I'm glad it worked out." I said, "He didn't get any of it." "No," she said. "He wouldn't have. It was never marital property. It was always yours." I thanked her and hung up and sat in my kitchen for a while. There's a version of this story where I'm angrier, where I catalog everything Russell took from me, every way he diminished me, every lie that I now have to hold up to the light and see for what it was. That anger is there. I'm not going to pretend it isn't. But here's what I keep coming back to. He thought he'd handled it. He thought that if he filed the paperwork quietly, took his 49% and the sale proceeds, and left me with nothing but a house I'd have to sell, that I would just absorb it. Move on, because that's what I'd always done. I'd absorbed everything, and moved on and kept the company running. He didn't account for the fact that I actually read what I sign. He didn't account for my father. He didn't account for Deborah. And he did not account for the fact that 11 years of learning every single detail of that business meant that I knew exactly what it was worth, who the real clients were, and how to run it alone. 6 months later, Callaway Freight Solutions landed the Dayton distribution contract. I negotiated it myself. The rep on the other end, who had dealt with Russell before, called me afterward and said it was the most efficient contract process he'd been through in years. I said, "I've been doing this for a while. I still haven't changed the name. Maybe I will, eventually. But right now I like walking into the office every morning and knowing that every single percent of it is mine. That every decision goes through me. That when the auditor comes in the spring and sits across from me for 6 hours, there is no one to walk through and take the credit. There's just me. And honestly, that's more than enough."